She walked into the first-class cabin wearing a dark gray sweatshirt and sweatpants, but they humiliated her and forced her to leave. They had no idea her billionaire husband owned the entire airline, and what happened next left everyone speechless. The morning sun streamed through the expansive windows of Chicago International Airport as Rebecca Morgan made her way through the bustling terminal. At 34, she moved with quiet confidence, the chestnut hair tucked under a navy cap, her athletic frame dressed in a comfortable dark gray sweatshirt and light gray sweatpants. A simple silver bracelet on her wrist was her only accessory. To the casual observer, she looked like any other traveler prioritizing comfort over style for a long flight. No one would guess that she was married to Jonathan Morgan, the billionaire tech innovator who had recently acquired Skyline Airlines as part of his growing transportation empire. Rebecca checked her watch, a modest timepiece that had belonged to her grandmother. She had plenty of time before boarding began for Flight 554 to Philadelphia, where her parents were celebrating their 45th wedding anniversary. Jonathan had offered their private jet, but Rebecca preferred flying commercial occasionally. It kept her connected to the real world in ways that wealth often insulated people from. "Just a regular black coffee, please," she told the barista at the terminal cafe, fishing cash from her pocket rather than using the platinum card tucked away in her phone case. The young man behind the counter smiled. "Heading somewhere nice?" "Philadelphia. Family celebration," Rebecca replied, dropping her change in the tip jar. "Well, have a great flight." Coffee in hand, Rebecca made her way to Gate 17. Her eyes lingered on the family sitting together, elderly couples holding hands, business travelers typing furiously on laptops. This diverse tapestry of humanity fascinated her, perhaps because she'd grown up in a modest household in rural Illinois before meeting Jonathan at a tech conference where she'd been presenting her environmental research. "Now boarding our first-class passengers for Skyline Airlines Flight 554 to Philadelphia," announced the gate agent. Rebecca gathered her simple carry-on, a well-worn backpack rather than designer luggage, and joined the short line forming at the priority boarding lane. A businessman in an expensive suit glanced at her casual attire, then did a subtle double-take. Rebecca was used to these looks. They no longer bothered her. "Boarding pass, please," said the gate agent, a practiced smile on her face. Rebecca handed over her phone displaying the digital boarding pass. The agent scanned it, and her smile faltered just slightly as she looked between the first-class designation and Rebecca's casual appearance. "Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Enjoy your flight." Rebecca nodded and walked down the jet bridge, unaware that her decision to dress comfortably today would soon create a storm that would change Skyline Airlines forever. The first-class cabin of Skyline Airlines Flight 554 gleamed with luxury. Wide leather seats and deep burgundy accents, an attentive flight attendant serving pre-departure champagne. As Rebecca stepped aboard, flight attendant Melanie Phillips looked up, her practiced smile freezing slightly at the sight of the casually dressed woman. "Good morning," Rebecca said warmly, glancing at her boarding pass. "Seat 2A, by the window." Melanie's perfectly penciled eyebrows arched slightly. "First class is to your left," she said, her tone carrying a hint of doubt. "Yes, I know. Thank you." Rebecca moved confidently toward her assigned seat, aware of Melanie's eyes following her. The first-class cabin was half full with passengers who fit the expected mold: men in business suits, a woman in an elegant dress, a celebrity chef Rebecca recognized from television. She stowed her backpack in the overhead compartment and settled into a seat, pulling out a dog-eared paperback rather than the latest electronic device. "Excuse me." A male flight attendant named Thomas appeared at her side, his voice low but firm. "May I see your boarding pass?" Rebecca looked up, meeting his skeptical gaze. Of course. She pulled up the digital pass on her phone again. Thomas scrutinized it longer than necessary, glancing between the screen and Rebecca's casual attire. "One moment, please." She watched as he conferred with Melanie near the front of the cabin, both stealing glances in her direction. The businessman across the aisle pretended not to notice, but his attention was obvious. Rebecca took a deep breath, recognizing the familiar signs of judgment forming. Melanie approached, now accompanied by the lead flight attendant, Vanessa, whose name badge indicated her supervisory status. "Ma'am," Vanessa began, her voice professionally modulated but cool. "There seems to be some confusion with your boarding pass." Rebecca set her book down. "There's no confusion. I'm in seat 2, a first class." Vanessa's smile tightened. "Our system occasionally makes errors. This is a first-class cabin and you don't think you belong here," Rebecca finished, her voice calm but direct. "Is that what you're suggesting?" A flicker of discomfort crossed Vanessa's face. "Not at all. We simply need to verify." "You've already verified my boarding pass twice," Rebecca pointed out. "It clearly shows I'm assigned to this seat." By now, the other first-class passengers were watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Thomas stood nearby, arms crossed, his expression suggesting he'd encountered this situation before and knew how it would end. "Perhaps you were upgraded accidentally," Melanie suggested, her tone making it clear how unlikely she considered this possibility. "Perhaps I purchased a first-class ticket," Rebecca countered. "Is there a dress code for this cabin that I'm unaware of?" Vanessa's professional veneer slipped just slightly. "No official dress code, but our first-class passengers typically present themselves in a manner that reflects the premium experience." "I see." Rebecca's voice remained steady. "So it's not about the ticket I purchased, but rather how I look." A distinguished older gentleman across the aisle cleared his throat. "I've flown in sweatpants in first class many times. No one's ever questioned my right to be here." Vanessa flushed. "Sir, this is between our staff and the passenger." "It shouldn't be happening at all," he replied, but then returned to his newspaper. Melanie leaned closer to Vanessa, whispering something. Vanessa nodded and turned back to Rebecca. "Ma'am, we have a full flight today, and we need to ensure all passengers are in their correct assigned seats. Our system shows this seat should be occupied by Anna Morgan." "That's correct," Rebecca said. "Rebecca Morgan. Do you have identification to verify that?" Thomas asked, his tone suggesting he caught her in a lie. Rebecca maintained her composure, though her patience was wearing thin. "You've never asked any other passenger to prove their identity after boarding." The gate agent verified my boarding pass. "It's standard procedure when there are discrepancies," Vanessa insisted. "What discrepancies?" "Besides the fact that I'm not dressed the way you think I should be." The tension in the cabin was palpable. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One woman whispered to her companion, loud enough for Rebecca to hear, "If she bought the ticket, what's the problem?" Vanessa's expression hardened. "Ma'am, if you cannot verify your identity, we'll need to reassign you to an economy seat." Rebecca sat straighter. "I can verify my identity, but I shouldn't have to. No one else in this cabin has been asked to do so." "Ms. Morgan, if that's who you are," Thomas said with barely concealed condescension, "we're simply following protocol." "No," Rebecca replied firmly. "You're following your biases. If I were wearing pearls and a designer outfit, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Vanessa's professional smile vanished entirely. "This is becoming disruptive. Either show identification, or we'll need to move you to economy class." Rebecca noticed the other passengers watching, some with sympathy, others with detached amusement, the daily theater of air travel unfolding before them. She could end this instantly by revealing who her husband was, but that wasn't how Rebecca navigated the world. She had never used Jonathan's name to gain advantages or special treatment. "This is discrimination," Rebecca stated clearly. "I'd purchased this ticket like everyone else." "Ma'am," Vanessa's voice turned frosty, "we need to complete boarding. Your options are to verify your identity, move to economy, or deplane." The injustice of the situation burned, but Rebecca recognized the impossible position. Making a scene would only delay the flight for everyone. "Fine," she said finally. "I'll move. But I want your names and employee numbers. This isn't over." Thomas smirked slightly. "We'll find you a seat in economy and provide compensation for the fare difference." "I don't want compensation," Rebecca replied, gathering her backpack. "I want accountability." As she stood, she noticed the sympathetic glances from a few passengers, while others studiously avoided eye contact. The older gentleman who had spoken up earlier shook his head in disgust. With an escort that felt more like an expulsion, Melanie led Rebecca through the premium cabin toward economy. Passengers in business class watched curiously as she passed, the hushed whispers following in her wake. Rebecca held her head high, refusing to show how deeply the humiliation cut. "Here you are," Melanie said, gesturing to a middle seat in economy. "We apologize for any inconvenience." Rebecca looked her directly in the eyes. "No, you don't. But you might soon enough." The following morning dawned bright over the Skyline Airlines corporate headquarters in Chicago. The glass and steel building reflected the urban landscape, an architectural statement of the company's premium position in the airline industry. In the executive suite, Chief Customer Officer Sandra Winters reviewed the day's agenda with growing anxiety. The quarterly customer experience review was scheduled for 10 a.m., and the numbers weren't promising. Passenger complaints had increased by 11% over the previous quarter, with issues regarding staff attitude topping the list. "The board members will be attending," her assistant reminded her, "and Mr. Morgan has confirmed he'll be joining in person rather than virtually." Sandra's stomach tightened. Jonathan Morgan had acquired Skyline Airlines 9 months ago, but today would mark his first appearance at a quarterly review. His reputation for demanding excellence was legendary, as was his limited tolerance for excuses. "Make sure Vanessa Reynolds and her first-class cabin crew are here," Sandra instructed. "They've maintained the highest customer satisfaction scores, and we need some positive examples to highlight." Meanwhile, across town, Jonathan Morgan adjusted his tie in the mirror of their spacious penthouse. At 38, he carried himself with the natural authority of someone accustomed to success. His tailored navy suit and crisp white shirt projected power without ostentation. "Are you sure you don't want me to say something directly to the flight attendants?" he asked, watching Rebecca's reflection as she sat on the edge of their bed. Rebecca shook her head. "This isn't about personal revenge, John. It's about changing a culture." "They humiliated my wife," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That's pretty personal to me." Rebecca stood and straightened his tie, though it needed no adjustment. "And I love you for that. But this is bigger than me or those 3 crew members. This is about a system that judges people based on appearances rather than character." Jonathan's expression softened as he looked at his wife. Rebecca had maintained her groundedness despite the wealth that surrounded her now. It was one of the countless reasons he'd fallen in love with her. She saw the world without the distortion of privilege. "All right," he agreed. "We'll do it your way." He checked his watch. "The meeting starts in an hour. You're sure about the timing?" Rebecca nodded. "Absolutely sure. And I'll be wearing exactly what I wore yesterday." At Skyline Airlines headquarters, the executive conference room filled with board members, department heads, and key staff. Vanessa Reynolds, along with Thomas and Melanie from the first-class cabin crew, sat together near the back. They had been surprised by the invitation to attend such a high-level meeting, but assumed it was related to their consistently high performance metrics. "Maybe they're finally creating that elite service team they've been discussing," Thomas whispered to Melanie. "We'd be the obvious choice to lead it." Melanie nodded, smoothing her perfectly pressed uniform. "I heard the new owner is actually attending. This could be a big opportunity." Vanessa shushed them as Sandra Winters called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for being here today," Sandra began. "As you know, customer experience is the cornerstone of our brand promise at Skyline Airlines. Today, we'll be reviewing our quarterly performance metrics and discussing strategies for improvement. The room quieted as the door opened and Jonathan Morgan entered. Tall and commanding, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from building a tech empire from the ground up. "Mr. Morgan," Sandra said, "we're honored to have you join us today." Jonathan nodded and took a seat at the head of the table. "Please continue." The presentation began with slides showing various metrics and charts. Sandra highlighted the positive aspects while carefully framing the areas of concern. Jonathan listened without expression, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "Now I'd like to call attention to our bright spots," Sandra said, her voice gaining enthusiasm. "Our first-class service on transcontinental routes has maintained a 92% satisfaction rating, well above industry average. We have members of that team here today." She gestured toward Vanessa, Thomas, and Melanie. Jonathan looked at them for the first time, his gaze revealing nothing. In fact, Sandra continued, "I've asked Vanessa Reynolds, our senior first-class cabin manager, to share some insights about their approach to premium customer service." Vanessa stood confidently and moved to the front of the room. "Thank you, Sandra. At Skyline Airlines, we believe the first-class experience begins the moment our passengers step on board. We're trained to recognize and accommodate the needs of our premium travelers who expect and deserve a certain level of service." The door to the conference room opened quietly. "We carefully attend to every detail," Vanessa continued, not noticing the new arrival. "From the way we address our passengers to ensuring that the first-class cabin maintains its exclusive atmosphere." Her words faltered as she noticed Jonathan Morgan's attention had shifted. Vanessa turned to see what had interrupted her presentation. There, standing just inside the doorway, was the woman in the dark gray sweatshirt, light gray sweatpants, and navy cap from yesterday's flight. For a moment, Vanessa didn't process what she was seeing. Then recognition dawned, followed swiftly by confusion. Thomas and Melanie exchanged alarmed glances as they too recognized yesterday's misplaced passenger. Jonathan Morgan stood. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "I believe some of you have already met my wife, Rebecca Morgan." The conference room froze in a tableau of shock and dawning horror. Vanessa stood at the presentation podium, her professional composure cracking like thin ice. Thomas and Melanie seemed to physically shrink in their seats, their faces draining of color. Around the table, executives and board members looked between Jonathan, Rebecca, and the flight attendants, trying to piece together the unfolding drama. "Your wife," Sandra Winters finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Jonathan confirmed, his tone deceptively casual. "Rebecca flew from Chicago to Philadelphia yesterday on our airline. In first class." Each phrase fell like a hammer. Rebecca moved to stand beside her husband, still dressed in the exact outfit that had deemed her unworthy of a seat she'd paid for. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the light, the only hint of luxury on her person. Perhaps, Jonathan suggested, Vanessa was about to explain Skyline Airlines' approach to recognizing premium travelers. "Please continue." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, no words emerging. Her carefully constructed presentation about first-class service excellence now lay in ruins at her feet. Melanie stared fixedly at the table, while Thomas's earlier smirk had transformed into an expression of pure dread. There must have been a misunderstanding," Vanessa finally stammered. "A misunderstanding," Jonathan repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting choice of words. Rebecca, would you characterize yesterday's incident as a misunderstanding?" Rebecca stepped forward. Unlike her husband, whose controlled anger simmered beneath a professional exterior, she projected calm purpose. "What happened yesterday wasn't a misunderstanding," she said, her voice clear enough to reach every corner of the silent room. "It was bias in action. I was judged not by my boarding pass, which was checked multiple times, but by my appearance." She looked directly at Vanessa, Thomas, and Melanie. You decided I didn't belong in first class because I didn't match your image of who deserves to be there. You questioned my identity, something you did for no other passenger. You threatened me with removal from the flight, and ultimately, you humiliated me by marching me back to economy class in front of a full plane of onlookers. A board member cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mr. Morgan, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, Jonathan interrupted firmly. This is precisely what this customer experience meeting should address. But let's be clear. I'm not here as an angry husband, though I certainly am one. His gaze swept the room. I'm here as the owner of this airline, deeply concerned about a culture that judges people based on appearances rather than treating all customers with equal respect. Sandra Winters looked stricken. Mr. Morgan, I assure you this incident doesn't reflect our company policies. Doesn't it? Rebecca interjected gently. Because when I spoke with other flight attendants and airport staff after the incident, I heard numerous similar stories. A teenager in a hoodie with a business class ticket questioned repeatedly. A disabled passenger assumed to be in the wrong line for priority boarding. An elderly woman in casual clothes redirected from the first-class lounge despite having a valid access pass. She placed a folder on the conference table. 27 documented incidents in the past 3 months alone, all following the same pattern. This isn't about 3 flight attendants. It's about a culture. The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Sandra reached for the folder with trembling hands. I had no idea, she whispered. That's the problem, Jonathan stated. You should have known. These incidents were reported, but they were classified as customer misunderstandings and buried in your feedback system. Vanessa had finally recovered enough to attempt damage control. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, she began, her voice professionally contrite. On behalf of our team, I offer my deepest apologies for yesterday's incident. There are protocols we're expected to follow regarding verification. Stop, Rebecca said quietly but firmly. You're still not understanding. This isn't about protocols. When the businessman in 2 wore sweatpants in first class last month, did you ask for his ID? When the famous actress in one boarded in sunglasses and a baseball cap, did you question her right to be there? The protocol isn't the problem. The selective application of it is. Thomas, perhaps sensing his career circling the drain, attempted to interject. Mrs. Morgan, there was no way for us to know who you were. That's exactly the point, Rebecca replied. You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with basic dignity. My worth as a passenger isn't determined by my marriage, my bank account, or my clothes. I purchased a ticket like everyone else. A heavy silence fell over the room as the truth of her words sank in. Jonathan looked at the 3 flight attendants. Your actions yesterday reflected poor judgment and explicit bias. In many companies, that would be cause for immediate termination. Vanessa, Thomas, and Melanie seemed to brace for the inevitable. However, he continued, firing you would solve nothing at a systemic level. It would just make us feel better temporarily while allowing the underlying culture to remain unchanged. He turned to address the entire room. Starting next week, Skyline Airlines will implement a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all customer-facing staff. Additionally, we're revising our customer feedback system to specifically track and address incidents involving perceived discrimination or prejudice. Rebecca stepped forward. And the 3 of you, she said to the flight attendants, will be temporarily reassigned. 1 month working alongside our customer advocacy team, directly handling passenger complaints. Another month in economy class service. After that, if your performance reviews indicate a genuine understanding of these issues, you can reapply for your first-class positions. Sandra Winters found her voice. I'll personally oversee these changes, Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, and I believe we should compensate the other passengers you identified in your report. Jonathan nodded in agreement, then addressed the flight attendants directly. This isn't about punishment. It's about understanding. The true measure of premium service isn't how well you treat people who look important. It's how you treat everyone, regardless of appearance. As the reality of the situation fully dawned on everyone present, Board Chair Eleanor Simmons spoke up for the first time. "I believe we owe Mrs. Morgan our gratitude," she said firmly. "She's identified a significant blind spot in our operation that could have continued damaging our reputation and alienating customers. This is an opportunity for meaningful change." Vanessa, Thomas, and Melanie sat in stunned silence, their earlier confidence shattered by the realization of their actions and the unexpected consequence. Not immediate firing, but something perhaps more challenging: the opportunity to learn and change. 3 months later, Rebecca Morgan settled into Seat 2 on Skyline Airlines Flight 923 from Chicago to San Francisco, dressed in the same dark gray sweatshirt, light gray sweatpants, and navy cap. She opened her book and prepared for the 4-hour journey to a climate research conference. "Good morning, Mrs. Morgan," said a familiar voice. "Can I offer you a beverage before takeoff?" Rebecca looked up to see Thomas standing beside her seat, professional and attentive. His eyes held none of the condescension from their previous encounter. Instead, there was something that looked remarkably like respect. "Just water for now, thank you," she replied. As Thomas placed the water on her armrest, he hesitated. "Mrs. Morgan, I'm not sure if you remember me." "I remember you, Thomas." He nodded, acknowledging the impossibility of being forgotten. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "These past 3 months have been educational." Rebecca regarded him thoughtfully. "How was your time in customer advocacy?" "Humbling," he admitted. "I had no idea how many passengers felt dismissed or judged by our actions. Things I never even thought about. Little comments or assumptions. They noticed everything." "People usually do," Rebecca replied. Down the aisle, she spotted Melanie assisting an elderly man in casual clothes, her manner patient and attentive as she helped him stow his worn duffel bag in the overhead compartment. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. "The training program you and Mr. Morgan implemented has changed things," Thomas continued. "Not just procedures, but how we think about our passengers, about people in general." "I'm glad to hear that, Thomas." Thomas straightened, returning to his professional demeanor. "Enjoy your flight, Mrs. Morgan. If you need anything at all, I'm here to assist." As he moved to serve other passengers, Rebecca noticed Vanessa in the galley, efficiently preparing for takeoff. Their eyes met briefly, and Vanessa gave a small, respectful nod, not the exaggerated deference of someone afraid for their job, but the genuine acknowledgement between people who had moved past conflict to understanding. The changes at Skyline Airlines extended far beyond these 3 flight attendants. The anti-bias training program had been implemented company-wide, from check-in counters to executive offices. Customer satisfaction scores were climbing, and employee morale had improved as staff felt empowered to treat all passengers with equal respect. More significantly, other airlines had taken notice. Skyline's new approach to inclusive customer service was becoming a model in the industry, challenging long-held assumptions about how premium service should look and feel. As the flight reached cruising altitude, Rebecca gazed out the window at the patchwork landscape below. She thought about how a single moment of injustice had catalyzed meaningful change, not through vengeance or public shaming, but through the harder, more lasting path of education and accountability. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. "How's the flight?" She smiled and typed back, "Different. Better." 2 rows ahead, a young woman in ripped jeans and a vintage t-shirt laughed with her companion in the first-class cabin, receiving the same attentive service as the business executives around them. No second glances, no veiled comments, no subtle indicators that they somehow didn't belong. This, Rebecca realized, was the true victory, not the vindication of her own experience, but the small, everyday dignities now extended to others who might have been previously judged and found wanting. The seat belt sign dinged off. Vanessa approached with the beverage cart, her manner professional and warm as she served each passenger with equal consideration. When she reached Rebecca, there was a moment of genuine connection. "Mrs. Morgan," Vanessa said quietly, "I want you to know that what you and Mr. Morgan did, it was fair. More than fair. And it made us better at our jobs." Rebecca nodded. "That was the point. Not punishment, but progress." "I've learned to see people differently," Vanessa admitted. "To question my assumptions. It's changed how I interact with everyone, not just passengers." As Vanessa moved on, Rebecca reflected on how change happens, rarely through dramatic gestures or grand statements, but through individual moments of recognition, through systems that reinforce better choices, and through leaders willing to address not just symptoms but causes. The plane banked gently westward toward San Francisco, carrying its diverse complement of humanity across the sky, each passenger different, each equally deserving of respect regardless of appearance, status, or circumstance. A simple truth, yet one so often forgotten in a world quick to judge based on superficial cues. For Rebecca Morgan, dressed in her comfortable sweatshirt and cap, the victory wasn't that she could now fly first class without question. The victory was that, increasingly, so could everyone else. True change comes not from punishment, but from understanding and accountability. Has someone ever judged you by your appearance, or have you caught yourself making snap judgments about others? This story reminds us that dignity should never depend on how we look, but rather on our shared humanity.